Hello, beloved listeners. It's Tom here. This episode is an extra special treat for all of you. It was going to be episode 34's Patreon-exclusive bonus material, but after some extremely depressing recent international events, I thought everyone could use a pick-me-up. I don't want to dwell on the details, but on one particular morning, Wednesday the 6th of November 2024, I wasn't feeling terribly happy, but I found that editing the episode you're about to hear was making me smile. So I thought it best to spread that smile around to all of you and share the gift of Aidan Turnbull via my good friend Thomas Ellis. This is Great Big Old Faces of Virtue 3, which is not to say that it's the third Great Big Old episode of Faces of Virtue, rather that it's the Great Big version of the original Faces of Virtue episode 3, which is old. From way back in September 2020, in fact. Back then, I was trying to keep the length of Faces of Virtue episodes down to around half an hour, but as you're about to hear, Aidan and I talked for around twice that long, and I've wanted to release the full, uncut, extra zen interview ever since. So here it is. I hope it lifts your spirits, even a little bit. To those faithful and adored Patreon supporters, though, don't worry, there is an extra bonus treat waiting for you at patreon.com/crowleytime, and it should be a really fun one, so make sure to go check it out. And to those of you not yet donating to the show, this Great Big Old episode makes for a nice preview of the sort of bonus material you get for signing up. So if you enjoy it, you might like to consider going to patreon.com/crowleytime and joining. But to all of you, supporter or not, be good to yourselves, stay strong, and enjoy this.
Attention, faithful and generous Patreon supporter. Welcome behind the red velvet rope to the VIP section. This is the bigger, more extendeder and more inspiringer cut of this episode. You have paid your entry fee. Now come in and meet the
Great Big Old Faces of Virtue!
Greetings and welcomes, listeners, to this penultimate episode of the Crowley Time miniseries where Tom Crowley, profile those who step at least slightly out of their comfort zones in an effort to improve their lot, and the lots of those around them. This episode's Prince of Progress is Aidan Turnbull of Choddingham in County Durham, a martial arts instructor and pillar of the community who recently mobilised all of his high-kicking young students for a very special cause. Many thanks to Thomas Ellis for putting us in touch with Aidan. Hello, Aidan.
Hello, Thomas. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. How are you doing?
Well, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for asking. I'm fine, thank you. Are you having a good day?
I'm having a lovely day, yeah. I mean, it's a slightly sort of grey, overcast day here in Choddingham. But, the sun is shining inwardly because I've got the chance to talk to you about the work that we're doing and about myself and just have a chat in general. So, yeah, the sun is shining inwardly, I'd say.
Well, that's a very beautiful philosophy. It sounds like you've got a very positive attitude towards life there in Choddingham, in County Durham, is it?
It is, yep, Choddingham in County Durham, Chod, as we call it.
Old
Chod, Choddy, and someone who's from Choddingham is, of course, a Chodder. So, yeah, I'm a Chodder through and through, 8 generations as far as I'm aware. But, yep, Choddingham, County Durham, that's where I have me home.
Now, tell us a bit about what it is you do, because I know you're quite an institution. You're a figure of respect in the community. Tell us what position you hold.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I like to see myself a bit as the sort of Pritt stick that's binding Choddingham together. I'm a martial arts instructor by trade. I'm a black belt in both judo and karate, and I run the local dojo in Choddingham, which is the Dojo Ganbate Ne, and I've been running that for about kind of 10 years now. But yeah, so I'm a martial arts instructor by trade, but I also do a lot of charity work within the local area.
And of course, as people who've practiced self-defense martial arts will know, there's a great philosophical aspect to it. It's not just about flipping people over your shoulder, is it? It's also about aligning yourself spiritually. I imagine that comes into your work a lot.
Oh, absolutely, Thomas. Well, I think that's actually the most important thing about martial arts, I think, as we'll talk about, is that, throwing people over your shoulder, as you say, that is very important in something like judo. But it's also about sort of throwing negative emotions over your mind's shoulder, which isn't your actual physical shoulder as it was. I mean, to sort of give you a sense of where I'm coming from, I was wondering if I could tell you just a short Buddhist parable.
Oh, yes, that'd be wonderful, please.
Sure. So, I mean, just for you and the listeners, I mean, you might be familiar with the kind of parables that you'd hear in a primary school assembly. And they're a bit like that, but because they're Buddhist, the answer isn't actually Jesus or Jesus Christ, to give him his full name. It's usually a bit more confusing than that. But I think they do have a lot to teach us. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to tell you now the parable of the pigeons.
Parable of the pigeons, thank you. Yes, please.
Sure thing. So once upon a time in ancient China, the emperor there, the emperor's sort of like the kind of king, or the prime minister. He's sort of in charge of all the business there.
I'm familiar with emperors, yes, thank you.
Well, this is the emperor of China, so just so you know that. He's quite an important character in the parable. Anyway, he was mates with some pigeons, and they lived up on the roof of his palace in a little coop up there. And, you know, they were just getting on with things, and they'd fly off and they'd fly back and all that sort of thing. And anyway, one day the emperor says to his pigeons, he says, I want each of you to fly off and bring me a gift that will delight my senses. Now, the first pigeon, he flies off on the north wind, and he flies all the way over the Great Wall, all the way over to Mongolia, where it's proper cold, and he brings back an ice pear. Have you ever had, like, one of those ice pears, Tom?
I've had your average supermarket organic pear, but no, I haven't had an ice pear. What's that?
Well, an ice pear is usually, I mean, you can get them sometimes in a sort of covered market or somewhere like that. They're a kind of larger, whiter sort of pear, and they're usually frozen. I mean, it's a lovely fruit. It's very cold. And anyway, grows in cold climates there in Asia. Anyway, this first pigeon, he flies off. He brings back an ice pear in his beak, and he says, I've brought you something to delight your sense of taste.
I'm really sorry, but just to clarify, we're talking about an ice pear, not a nice pear.
It's an ice pear. I guess you could say it's a nice ice pear. So
let's settle on that, yeah.
He's brought back a nice ice pear, and he says to the emperor, he says, I've brought you somewhat to delight your sense of taste. And anyway, the emperor's all, oh, that's lush, that's a real treat, thanks for that, mate. And then the second pigeon, she flies off on the west wind, and she flies all the way over the Gobi Desert, and it's proper dry there. And anyway, she comes back from the desert, and she's got a piece of carved jade in her mouth. And she says, I've brought you something to delight your sense of vision. And the emperor's all, oh, that's class, that's mint, I love jade, me, oh, that's really Chinese, cheers, pet. And the third pigeon, she flies in over on the east wind, so she heads east, and she goes all the way over the sea to Japan.
Wow.
And she brings back a really high-end Mitsubishi Walkman. And she says to the emperor, I got you this Mitsubishi Walkman with stereo headphones to delight your sense of hearing. And the emperor's loving it. He's got 3 fantastic gifts, and he's saying to the third pigeon, he's like, oh, cheers, pet. Thanks for that. I can listen to all my classic UK garage CDs now when I'm out running. Now, the fourth pigeon, while this is going on, he's doing nothing. He's just sitting in his bedroom in his coop. And the emperor, he starts to get a bit annoyed with this. He sort of knocks on the door of the coop, and he says, where's my gift? Why haven't you flown off? And the fourth pigeon, he comes out of his little house, and he looks at the emperor, and he says, I think you're doing a very good job, and you work yourself too hard. You need some time off. Now, I don't need to fly off on the south wind to bring you a gift that will delight your sense of self-respect. Eh? Now all the other pigeons are furious, obviously, because they've gone to all this bother.
They've gone to loads of trouble.
They've gone to loads of trouble. I mean, like, they've flown miles and they've been carrying these heavy objects, these, you know, sort of, I mean, one of them was carrying a big piece of electrical equipment. And so they're saying, like, you lazy bastard, like, where'd you get off with that kind of behaviour? The audacity on this lad. Now, the emperor, he just has a little kind of smile, and he says, the most important sense is our inner sense of well-being and self-esteem. This little lad has the right idea, and his gift is way better than all the shite that you've got me. I'm going to make him the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So that's the parable of the pigeons there, yeah.
That's the end of the parable.
That is the end of the parable, yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, because to my ear, and maybe this is just very Western of me, in a sort of Judeo-Christian tradition, but to my mind, that parable seems to suggest, are you a feckless, selfish idiot who cannot live up to his commitments? If yes, just sort of flatter somebody's sense of self-importance and you will get away with your behaviour indefinitely. Is that how you read the story?
Well, I mean, that's a reading, Tom, and of course you're entitled to that reading. I think that reading is incorrect myself. I think it's quite stupid, and I think it's also quite hurtful.
And of course, it's your right to have that opinion of my reading as well.
That is true, yeah. But
we're in the marketplace of ideas, so
we are in the marketplace of ideas. And I mean, just like in the marketplace of ideas, you might have some characters coming up to you and they're sort of saying things that are quite provocative. But, you know, like, I don't know actually how that would work in a real marketplace, because usually everyone's just sort of getting on. I mean, like, you might have some lad who's saying, you know, a bit too loudly, like, fruit for £1 or something like that. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point of the story, Tom, is that pigeons didn't need to go on those big journeys to get those extravagant gifts. What they actually just needed to do was to stay inside and actually learn some home truths. That's why we call them home truths, because you don't find them elsewhere. You find them inside. So it's all about sort of inner calmness and an inner sense of well-being, self-esteem. And, you know, you don't need to go to Japan or Mongolia or the Gobi Desert. You can find what you're looking for by searching for the
market. Yes, I understand. So on that topic, you're taking these philosophical ideas and you are translating them into a kind of a physical, unlike the fourth pigeon, you're doing something real with them, in that you are teaching a discipline, you're teaching physical fitness, and self-defense to young people. Is that right?
Well, that's true, but I do like to see myself more as a fourth pigeon than as the previous three. So, I mean, that fourth pigeon, I've drawn from that parable quite a lot when I've had trying or difficult circumstances. But yeah, so I teach martial arts. I teach mostly karate and a bit of judo now and then as well. My wife is more of a judo enthusiast than I am, but I like to see myself as more of a mixed martial arts practitioner. So, yeah, but I also teach those kind of skills of knowing yourself and feeling calm with yourself and just being a kind of relaxed, cool dude, really. That's what I'm sort of trying to teach people.
I've seen that you offer several classes for different age groups. You've got a sort of 6 to 8 years old. You've got 8 to 10. 10 to 12. And so that seems to be all the courses you offer. So is that the age group that you cater to the most?
Well, I mean, the dojo does run classes up to the sort of senior sessions, but sadly nobody's really signed on for those. At the moment, what we've got is we've got 3 kind of age groups. The first ones, they're all based on fish. So the first one is little tiddlers, and little tiddlers are kind of like your 4 to 6s. After that, you move on to minnows. The minnows are kind of your 6 to 8s. And then 9 to 12, they're your koi carps. And the koi carps are the bigger boys, yeah. And girls as well. But, so, I mean, mostly I'd say my students are between the age range of about 7 and 9. That is where they tend to cluster. But we are trying to actively recruit adults.
Well, you mentioned your wife there as well. So you're mainly coming at things from a karate perspective, is that right? Mm. And your wife is more interested in judo. Does she teach as well? How did you two meet?
Well, I met my wife at an MMA tournament, mixed martial arts tournament in Bucharest. Now, my wife, Judo Judy, that's what they used to call her. I mean,
that's very nice, yeah.
Her name's not actually Judy, her name's Joanne. But I met Joanne in Bucharest, and I wasn't obviously competing against her. She was in the women's competition, but I remember seeing her there across the sort of hall, the Adrian Ionescu Memorial Stadium, and I saw her there just absolutely throwing this massive Uzbekistani lass, just throwing her clear across the room with a sort of huge earth-shattering grunt, and I'd never seen a woman that sturdy. I mean, you cannot throw her. You can try, but she's like a tree stump. She's like a kind of beautiful, graceful tree stump. And she was just shrugging off these big lasses from all over the world. I mean, they were from, sort of, she's quite sort of low on the ground, again, the tree stump analogy. But she's quite low on the ground. These bigger lasses, they're sort of moving around trying to sort of use their weight. But she just shrugs them off. She's throwing them across the room. They're screaming and crying. I think it was just the sight of seeing her reduce these massive lasses to tears, that I thought, man, that's the woman I'm going to marry. Wow. But she is the judo practitioner. She does a lot of the girls' classes at the dojo. But she's also a very active martial artist in her own right, whereas I see myself as more of a teacher.
More of a sensei,
more of a sensei
in the community really. There. Have you always sort of had that community spirit? You said that you've 8 generations of the Turnbull family have grown up in Choddingham. So did you feel that sense of togetherness, of spirituality from a very young age?
Well, I'd love to be able to say that, I sort of karate chopped my way out of my mother's uterus, but I mean, that just wouldn't be true. I mean, my family background, actually, I come from quite a difficult background, Tom. I'm going to sort of level you with you there. I had a 1920s childhood in the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Right.
Because my father, Aidan Senior, he worked in a local industrial heritage museum. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with these kind of places. You might have gone to one of them on a school trip.
Yes, I've seen a few, I think, yeah.
Yeah, basically, like a place that used to have an industry, that'll close down. And so they open up a museum to say, oh, this is what we used to do. Like, we used to, dig coal, or we used to, dig iron, or these sort of things. So my father worked at one of those, and he played a coal miner. And what he'd have to do is that there'd be sort of school parties and elderly people, and they'd come round. And his job was to stand, it was a coal mining museum. He'd stand at the pit head and he'd push a little cart full of coal about 6 feet. And then he'd say to the people, he'd say in his sort of miner's voice, he'd be like, it's a proper hard job being a miner. Like, do you think you can push this big thing of coal up this bank? And of course, he'd usually point at the sort of Jack the lad of the group, and they'd sort of try and they'd struggle.
The widest boy in the group, yeah.
The widest boy in the group, and or sometimes, to be cruel, he'd point at the weediest lad, and he'd say, do you think you can push this coal up that ramp? And they'd try pushing it, and it'd be probably difficult, because, I mean, sometimes he'd have the brakes on so they couldn't do it. Then he'd laugh and he'd say, see, it's not so difficult being a miner. And he did this, I mean, he'd be doing that about 15 times per hour. As the tour groups were coming through. So he was pushing this thing, he was doing his speech, pushing this thing, doing his speech. And I think that sort of psychologically destroyed him. That kind of repetitive, quite unpleasant behaviour. And I mean, he used to come back to the house, and my mum was, she was actually an executive with a software marketing company. But when she came back to the house, because my father had gone crazy, she had to get into her miner's housewife outfit and be doing some sort of 1920s chore. So she'd have to put away her marketing plans and things like that. And she'd have to just put a load of grey socks through a mangle, or be cutting out some sort of pastry shapes or something like that. Because he'd come in, he'd be covered in coal, he'd be wearing his 3-piece miner's tuxedo. Yeah. And he'd be, where's me dinner, woman? And she'd have to, sort of prepare the dinner for us. And he'd summon me and my sisters, and he'd give us all clips round the ear. I mean, it was very difficult, but
it's like you've had to sort of stage manage a Ken Loach film that nobody's filming. Well, it was for the benefit of the trauma that was inflicted on your father.
Exactly. I mean, we were essentially being psychologically tyrannized by this man. But at the same time, there was a sense of the greater good, because he was telling people about our company and our region's industrial heritage. So, I mean, even though it did, I think, leave lasting psychological scars on me and my sisters. I mean, I think me more than my sisters, because I got the worst of it. My sisters are both helicopter pilots now, so I think they're both fine. But
that's wonderful.
Well, I know it is great. I mean, they work
Coast Guard, or are they private hire, or what?
Private hire mostly.
Oh,
yeah,
well,
I think.
Well,
a big thing that sort of Clarice does is that she flies the lads over to the races and stuff like that. So when you got the Galway races or something, she's mostly flying kind of quite a sort of, beefy faced red men, to and from various race courses. But, I mean, she loves it there. I mean, they live for the blades, they say. They love the blades. That's what, we call it, or they'd call a helicopter in the trade. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, quite.
But I think all of us were, seeking an escape. And whether that was through perhaps a sort of inner Buddhist peace or through rotary-based aircraft, I think the three of us, we wanted to get out. And I mean, I still live in Chod, but we wanted to escape from the tyranny of my father. And for me, the moment came really when I went round to my friend Liam's house. And Liam was, one of those lads who'd be on Microsoft Paint and he'd be drawing like kind of an obscene thing on there. And, he had a bit of a devil may care attitude. But,
yes, I know the type, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of those kids that's seen Child's Play 3, when he's about 7.
Yeah.
Has some sort of ideas about the world and how it works, but it's quite easy if you are a sort of
slightly wrong ideas absorbed from perhaps media that he shouldn't have been consuming at that age, maybe.
Absolutely, perhaps media, perhaps the parents, stuff like that. But anyway, Liam, bit of a wrong'un. But anyway, I remember when I was about 8 years old, I went round to Liam's house, and he introduced me to something that I think had a huge influence on who I became. Which was the Steven Seagal film, Under Siege. Have you seen Under Siege, Thomas?
No, I haven't, but I'm aware of Seagal. You're a Steven Seagal fan?
I'm a huge Steven Seagal fan. I mean, I think kind of particularly Under Siege. I mean, just to sort of tell you and maybe some of the listeners who perhaps, I mean, I've sort of had a listen to some of your work, Thomas, and
thank you.
You wait for what I'm going to say. I hope I'm not sort of, making too many assumptions, but I think many of your listeners will have had quite a sheltered life, so they might not necessarily be aware of something like Steven
I'd love
Seagal.
to disagree with you, but I don't have the evidence to...
Well, if we don't have the evidence, we'll just have to, sort of agree to disagree. Anyways, Steven Seagal, Under Siege, it's a wonderful film. Steven Seagal plays a kind of, I guess you could call him a kind of Cajun man. He's doing this voice. It's sort of not clear whether it's a kind of African-American voice or something else, but, it's the early 90s, that was all right. And he's cooking the stews on this ship, but it turns out that's just a cover because he's actually the best in the world at knacking people. And Gary Busey, for a very convoluted reason, it takes over the ship in drag, and Stephen has to, put the world to rights, really. So I'd never seen a Steven Seagal film before, and Steven Seagal, just to give you a sense of sort of his dimensions, he's about 6'5" tall, and he's about 4.5 feet wide, and he's about 4.5 feet deep. So, the cubic area of this guy is quite large.
It's a massive cube, isn't it? Cubic is right.
He's just like a huge sort of cuboid specimen. And
ponytail coming off the back.
With a ponytail, just a beautiful ponytail. And,
like a lovely horse.
Well, exactly, like a lovely horse. But like with a lovely horse, you've got to be careful around Stephen because, he might be eating out your hand. But if you get behind his legs, he'll kick. And he'll send you flying across the room. Anyway, Steven Seagal in that film, not to put to call a spade, he's a big lad.
He's a big chap, yeah.
He's a big cube, but he moves like water. And there's something beautiful about watching just such a large, chunky boy moving that beautifully, that fluidly, watching the universe rearrange itself around his ponytailed immensity.
Yeah. Have you ever seen an elephant swimming?
I've not actually, no. I've not had the pleasure.
It's so surprisingly graceful. I imagine it's quite a similar, or like a manatee gliding through, one of those pools that you can see up into at the zoo. If you're looking up, you're in one of those all-round tunnels made of glass with the aquarium around you, and you see the manatee sort of gliding gracefully around each other, and then. Then when you see them on the shoreline, they flop on there like a sort of a sack of discarded meat from a butcher's shop. But get them in the water and they look like ballerinas,
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you look at Steven Seagal, if you were to lay him out on a slab, he's just a series of offcuts and sort of offal arranged into a sort of crude human form. But he moves like, I guess you could say he moves like some ribbons, or he moves like a kind of a breeze. He just moves himself so beautifully. And that had a very profound effect on me. I mean, another bit in Under Siege that also had a profound effect on me is there's a bit where a naked lass jumps out of a wedding cake. And, I mean, that was what my friend Liam, he was very excited to show me that. But, I think
you weren't so concerned about that part. You thought, show me more of
that was obviously
martial arts.
Very exciting because, you know, it's this very fast-paced sequence and she comes out and, you know, it's, absolutely phenomenal. But for me, it was more the martial arts and seeing like how Stephen, this just massive lad, this lovely horse of a man, can move like some ribbon, or, you know, a breeze or a little babbling beck. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was seeing Steven Seagal that really, like, put me into this thought about, well, how do we move? And I wish I had that in a piece. I mean, I've been very disappointed with Stephen's behaviour in subsequent years. You know, I think while he still can take a man apart with his hands, you know, he's moved off to Russia and, I think he's let himself go a bit. But anyway, back in his prime, there was no one like him. And I will always have a profound respect for Stephen for his performance in Under Siege.
Well, that clearly had a very, very serious impact on you. So, but I'd love to hear more about the dojo that you run and the lessons that you try and, to drill into these kids, you know, to try and shape them up spiritually and physically as well. Absolutely. Well,
the dojo that I run, Dojo Ganbatte Ne. Ganbatte Ne is, that's Japanese, Thomas, for, do your best.
Yeah, I'm right,
yeah. Dojo Ganbatte Ne was, we founded it about, 10 years ago, and, it was actually opened. You'll be interested to know this, Thomas. It was opened by Cherie Blair.
Oh, wow.
Have you met Cherie Blair, Thomas?
No, I never have, you know, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, well, she's lovely. I mean, she gets a very bad rap from the press for being absolutely mental, and she is mine, but she is the most empathetic person I've ever met.
Wow, really?
Absolutely, man. I mean, she is such a good listener. I think it's probably from all those nights where Tony would come home and he'd complain about what his mates in the Coalition to Liberate Iraq were doing. You know, they were sort of, you know, giving him a hard time, and she'd have to just sit there and sort of listen to that. But I mean, she'll listen to you and she'll sort of like nod her head quite vigorously. And then she'll ask you a very considerate question and she'll start nodding her head again. But imperceptibly, she'll sort of tilt her head 5 degrees to the left throughout the conversation. So by the end of the chat I had with her when she opened the dojo, and I was explaining, you know, the work that I hope to do, her head was at a nearly 95 degree angle.
Because the conversation had gone on so long, she'd just been sort of ratcheting ever increasingly 5 degrees by 5 degrees just across to one side.
Absolutely, but I mean, you couldn't sort of notice it happen, but it did happen imperceptibly. And by the end, yeah, she was still nodding. I mean, I didn't know a human head could do that. I mean, I was concerned for her spine, but I'd never felt. I mean, I'm trying to do this now,
and it's very hard to out nod and have your head at a sort of 95 degree angle to out one side. It's not. Well, no, it's. I can tell you, it's almost impossible.
I'd advise you not to do it, Thomas. I think particularly with a sort of neck. But I mean, I'm making an assumption here just from the promotional materials that you sent me. But a neck that doesn't look terribly flexible, I'd say that's probably more of an advanced technique. But I mean, as I say, she's a great listener. But she was there at the opening, and I sort of set the opening up because I looked at what was happening in Shottingham, and you know, there was a lot of petty crime on the street, and there was a lot of petty behaviour, if I'm honest with you. And the kids, they were running riot. You know, you had people sort of scrumping for apples. You had people knocking old fellas' caps off.
I find that disgusting.
It is disgusting, actually, yeah. And I mean, you had people making sort of comments about dog's weight. That dog needs some more exercise, that sort of thing. You know, like just kids jumping in puddles, splashing the side of things. You know, writing like, you know, category C swear words in marker pen on the side of the bus stop.
People use that bus stop.
Exactly.
It's sort of like a bit of a northeastern version of the Warriors that you're painting for me here.
You know, it almost was. And just like in the Warriors, where they have to navigate this dystopian environment, but it's only through their control of their own bodies and their own love for each other and their city that they survive. Yep. I think that's what I did with the kids in Chod. I set the dojo up to kind of get kids off the streets and basically train them up in physical combat.
Well,
I wanted these kids to sort of stop being, thoughtless delinquents and become heavily disciplined killing machines. And that's what I tried to do. And that was the sort of guiding philosophy behind Dojo Gambattine. It was the idea of, sort of teaching these kids the inner strength that they can navigate this harsh urban jungle of this small market town and, coexist with themselves, with the environment around them, various kind of fruits and food pyramids that they interact with on a daily basis.
And wonderful training, I'm sure you do provide. So how do you go about teaching these kids? How do you incentivize them? What's the process from the moment a child arrives in your care to when they graduate as a sort of a small pudgy kind of murder machine?
Well, exactly. I mean, the thing is about martial arts is that it comes from a very sort of glorious lineage. Now, what a lineage, Tom, is it's almost like a kind of family tree. So if you've seen, Who Do You Think You Are? And, you'll have Joanna Lumley and she'll find out about, actually, it turns out my dad was William the Conqueror. And, well, who was William the Conqueror? And they'll go to his house and they'll say, well, this is William the Conqueror. This is what he did. A lineage is almost like that. It's like the heritage that we carry with us and that informs who we are, what we do and who we be. And sort of my lineage goes back all the way to the sort of Shaolin temple, where that started with Buddhist monks. Basically, when you're a Buddhist monk, a lot of what you do is just sort of sit there meditating and feeling quite smug about having all the answers. And that's pretty good, but it is quite dull. So these lads, they were just sitting around all the time. They sort of had to think of various ways to pass the time. I mean, one thing is they do these big pictures with sand and then they blow them out. Completely pointless. They were also being bullied a lot because, they're wearing this sort of orange get-up and all the other lads.
And they're all bald as well, so
they'd be going down the high street in medieval China and you just have people come up to them and go, slap head! And they'd slap their head, and the monks, they'd have nothing, they'd just be there going, what was that? That's shocking. I cannot believe that. But they had to sort of think of a more proactive way to sort of deal with this.
Yeah, you don't want to be putting up with that every time you walk down the high street and go to the medieval Chinese equivalent of like Rumbelows or something.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or kind of, the Quick Save or, the sort of Woolworths or something like that. I mean, they're kind of Chinese equivalent, But they had to sort of find a way to sort of channel all this nervous, frustrated, angry energy. And I've been to the Shaolin Monastery, actually, and they've got this tree that is just... It looks absolutely terrible because they used to do finger punches on that. Oh. And they've done all these hundreds of dents. So, I mean, this tree is just dented up. I mean, you wouldn't be able to insure this tree. It's just dented up something terrible. And then eventually they started doing the finger punches because, they thought they'd give the tree a break. They started doing the finger punches on each other.
Oh.
And they developed a very spiritual way of knacking people. And this sort of spread all over the world, really. So I'm part of that lineage. And the point is that you have to advance through. You have to kind of learn calmness first of all. You have to find the peace within yourself so that you can do immense violence to other people outside of yourself. My sensei, Sensei Francois, he was a Swiss man. When he was teaching me for the first year, all I did was just walking in posture until I had a perfect posture and a perfect walk. And then after that, I started working on like kind of punches and headlocks and leg locks. Could you just define perfect for me and the listeners? Does that mean that you have a very sort of upright, straight-backed, almost military walk, or is it more a kind of a letting it all hang out, huggy bear kind of swagger? Well, it's more, I suppose, on the more huggy bear end of the spectrum, If we've, say, got a kind of, a sort of comedic Nazi on the one side, and the other side we've got, kind of like a loose, sort of saggy beanbag bear. I'm more towards the sort of saggy bag side of the spectrum.
Bear, yeah.
More of a saggy bag bear, really, than, a Colonel von Klink or something like that.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying.
Well, just, Thomas, it's important. I mean, you're never too, old or too good to learn something. Now, it's
funny you should mention that, because speaking of age, it sounds like this is a very, very involved process of developing yourself as a person and as a warrior. And as I say, you don't appear to take any classes for people over 12, or at least there are none currently being offered. Is it that people's spiritual journey is complete at that age, or is it just that people aren't bothered carrying on?
Well, honestly, Tom, I mean, I know you're being very tactful about it, but that is my greatest failure as a sensei and also a human being, is that basically I'll have a huge number of students that are in the age range of sort of 7 to 9. But after that, it tends to kind of tail off. I think sort of around that age, the students will discover other things. Beyblades, for example, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer, various sort of consumerist hobbies. And, once you're sort of hooked on one of those habits, picking up your Beyblades, picking up your Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
EverQuest Online.
EverQuest Online, you're buying a box of plastic skeletons maybe 3 times a week. Yeah. By that point, I've lost them. Because I can't really compete with that, the sort of excitement of these sort of consumer-based hobbies. So,
is there some way that you could, because I know that in martial arts there's a belt system in terms of encouraging further development and also sort of wearing as a badge of pride how good you've got at the martial art. Is there a way that you could turn the belts maybe into small collectible plastic figurines or a computer game? Is there a way that could be done? Maybe that could entice them back in once they've been tempted away by these sort of shiny distractions.
Well, I guess, Tom, I mean, that's something that I could do, but I mean, because of me philosophical outlook, I am actually very concerned about single-use plastics, or even multiple-use plastics. My home is mostly wicker objects, woven objects, sort of, pottery-based objects, glazed objects, those kind of things. But I mean, we do have a belt system, actually, and that is what actually, encourages the students to progress through the levels. Because, I mean, we start off with, the first belt that they get when they show up is Baby's Blue. Now, Baby's Blue is nobody wants to be in the Baby's Blue belt because it's a horrible colour, Thomas. It's sort of really, really insipid blue. It's like the kind of coloured blue that you'd find on the pants of a bear that you'd buy in Clinton's cards to give to a newborn baby boy that maybe wasn't from your immediate family. I'm thinking more sort of like, your lass's cousin or something like that. They've had like the baby
I'm sort of picturing, I think I know what you mean. I think I'm picturing the blue that is the colour of the sky on one of those sort of insipid greetings cards. And then maybe an animal mascot or maybe those naked children from Love Is. And in the background is this sort of incredibly insipid blue. Is that the sort of blue that you're describing?
Horrible, like a kind of sort of milky, just insipid blue, like, sort of that kind of really sort of viscerally, aesthetically very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And I mean, particularly for the gents, the young lads, they really do not want
You don't want to stick in Baby's Blue, no.
No, and I have to tell them, the parents, I'm like, they've had their first lesson, they're going to come home and they're going to do 2 things. They're going to be punching their siblings and they're going to be trying to flush that belt down the toilet. And you've got to try and stop them from doing both of those things because there's a time and a place. There's a season for sowing and there's a season for reaping. And it's basically beyond Baby's Blue. That is how we sort of almost get them initially. They really want to progress beyond there. And the first sort of 6 weeks of the course are mostly about sitting quietly and not fidgeting with your hands. And sort of to do that, that's how we start cultivating that inner calm. We progress through the colours of the rainbow. I'm sure you know what those are. And then we start getting onto the sort of really difficult stuff.
There's red.
There is red, yeah.
Orange.
Orange, yeah.
There's, I think puce is in there somewhere.
I don't know if puce is. Wait.
And then there's like a few purples. And then I think violet's the last one.
I think violet is the last one. I mean, various school systems around the country, we got taught Roy Gabiv But I know it sort of varies around. You might have been told Puce, wherever it is you.
No, I remember. Sorry, it was Richard of Ironside.
Yep.
Drove to Heston Services. So what was that? Red?
Red, I think.
Sorry. Carry on.
Red is, of course, R is red, yeah. O for orange. Ironsides is, of course, indigo.
Yes.
That's one of your many purples, and then you go through those. Anyway, I don't know who Richard is mine. No. But anyway, maybe he should spend less time at the service station and more time, doing his route.
Well,
but
indeed.
Absolutely. We like to have fun, don't we? Anyway, as I was saying, you go through the rainbow and you go on to the kind of increasingly esoteric belts. So these are things like Bumblebee, which is black and yellow.
Right.
Police do not cross tape. There's a police do not cross belt where we sort of think about, martial arts in a sort of law enforcement situation. Tartan, which is, martial arts in the Scottish context. Because pretty much every country, I mostly do the sort of Asian stuff, but every country has its own martial art, Thomas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, in Scotland you got caber tossing, which is where you just hoy a big tree at your enemy and you just hope that, it crushes him.
Right. Well, I'm from East Finchley. What's the martial art of that region?
Oh, I guess that would be sort of one of those kind of Cockney-based sort of hybrid systems, really. I think that's what you got mainly for the sort of estuary martial arts sort of London system, really. Okay. Maybe less so towards, I know certainly that there is a big grappling style in Muswell Hill.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of abnormally similar to the kind of traditional wrestling you get in Turkish sort of Iranian territories.
Yes, I see.
That kind of, Caucasus Mountains. It's abnormally similar. Martial arts scholars can't get their heads around that connection. But, there we go. There are other places, have their own martial arts. Karate, obviously, Japan. Kung Fu, China. Israel actually has two. They've got Jiu-Jitsu and they've also got Judo. So there are countries that have different ones. And, Tartan is martial arts in the Scottish context, which is a very unique context. And after Tartan, you go on to Skeleton, which is like a skull and crossbones pattern.
Is that a colour, technically?
Pantone says it's a colour. Like, if you get the Pantone colour wheel, Thomas, you have a look on that, it will say, sorry, me calm slip there for a second. I'm just gonna realign me chi for a second. Yeah, there we are. Okay, nice and calm.
Okay, good.
I was just saying, sorry, you can't see it now, but I'm squeezing a tangerine incredibly hard at the moment. Anyway.
Right.
That's that. Nice and calm. I'm centered. I'm at one with the universe. I'm just a collection of cells that will one day disperse. And yeah, Tartan, Skeleton, Police Do Not Cross Tape, they are all colours according to Pantone, which is the international regulatory body for martial arts belts. There are some of the other ones. You've got the list of belts there, haven't you? So you can sort of...
Yeah, I've got there's a few here. What do we have? We've got, let's see, obviously there's a Skeleton. That's one of the higher up belts. So after Baby's Blue, you've got a Puke Brown, which is not a colour I'm familiar with. Obviously, that's another unpleasant one you've got further down the list in order to encourage the kids to try harder. But I would have thought often green is what's associated with vomit. But I
think that's more in the kind of Beano context, Thomas. But
I suppose
if you've spent a lot of time, sort of punching people in the stomach, you'd know that vomit is actually more usually brown.
That's right, actually.
This is something that I'm very aware of because sometimes, it's not your intention when you're doing martial arts, but sometimes you will punch someone so hard in the sort of upper pubic area that they will just barf. And it's usually sort of a kind of brownish, porridgey, orangey kind of colour.
Yeah, when you look at the streets after a Saturday night out,
it's very much
quite right, actually.
That's usually those kind of spews are from martial arts practitioners who've been set upon by toughs or thugs. Yeah.
You've got Charlie Brown's jumper here. That's one of them. What does that signify spiritually?
Well, I think just the thing is that Charlie Brown is, I heard, I think it was the great sort of American martial arts practitioner Chuck Norris described this to me. I saw him at a conference and he said, I can't do the voice, but he was like, Charlie Brown is the quintessential pussy He is an absolute pushover and a waste man. And, that's why we get the sort of early years to have his kind of jumper. I mean, he's not only, there's that girl who's just completely ruining his life. His own dog is making a laughing stock out of him. He can't catch a break. He's obviously got some sort of hearing problem, but, that doesn't excuse his complete pushover attitude. And I teach the children to scorn Charlie Brown.
Right.
Because he represents a kind of passivity rather than an active calmness.
And there's also here the brutalist belt. What's that? Is that because they're brutal, or is that the style, the architecture, or?
It's actually the architectural style, so it's a kind of concrete-y colour. I mean, that's very sort of popular amongst, sort of, if people do stay in, they usually progress to that. So that's, your lads who are reading Mundial football magazine. They're talking about post-war architecture, those kind of boys. Okay. They'd be the ones who'd be wearing a sort of brutalist belt. But it's a sort of, kind of, imagine a kind of urinated upon concrete. It's that sort of yellowy kind of grey colour.
Yeah, slightly off grey, yeah.
Off grey, but it has
of yellow.
Yeah, but it has a kind of, a sort of stark charm to it. Because I think, there is a time and a place for all the belts as we progress through the system,
Of course. But it's time for us, I think, to talk about the reason that I'm speaking to you today here on Faces of Virtue. Of course, we're concerned with local activism and charitable causes and similar positive campaigns. And you yourself have been involved in a very significant charitable cause lately, isn't that right?
That's true, yeah. I've been organising the 72-hour chop-a-thon for Waycallum
now,
in Shottingham.
Chop-a-thon, what does this entail?
Well, the chop-a-thon is sort of karate chopping, so it's usually something that you might have at like a martial arts meeting, where practitioners and students will just chop for a set number of time, with each stroke being in perfect precision. Right. Or each blow, or each stance. And the chop-a-thon that we did was a karate chop-a-thon, and we did it for 72 hours.
Wow, that must be exhausting. And these are your students, these are very young children, just standing there and just chopping the hell out of each other for 72 straight hours.
That is exactly what happened. Yeah, they were very young children, just non-stop karate chopping. For 72 hours in the Shottingham marketplace. We did actually
get the sort of scene that, in my mind, it's the sort of thing you might see in the middle of a montage in an Adam Curtis film. Like, it feels very sort of dystopian, the image of these uniformed children just drubbing each other for a sustained period. Was that the experience you had of it?
Well, absolutely. It's funny you mention Mr. Curtis, actually, because he got in touch. He was like, I've heard what you're doing. I'm going to put some Aphex Twin over that, and I'm going to use it in my new documentary, which is about how two obscure kind of computer scientists in the early 1960s are actually responsible for grime music. And I said, well, that sounds absolutely unwatchable, and I think you're running on fumes by this point, Mr. Curtis. But, fair enough. I can't stop you. That's, just the local council.
And it's a lot of fun for the kids as well to be in a sort of 7-hour documentary on BBC Four.
If there's one thing I know about kids, is that they love Adam Curtis. Their little faces just light up when, he's explaining about how, the former Soviet Union allocated goods and services, and how that's actually like, what Microsoft Excel does now, or, about how, Muammar Gaddafi was actually, not that bad a lad. But, one of those sort of things. So, Mr. Curtis was there with his film crew, but we also had a lot of, sort of positive reception from the local people. We raised a great deal of money. And we were also sponsored by an energy drink, which is...
Are you allowed to say which one, or is there some sort of NDA?
I'm actively encouraged to say which one.
Which one was it?
It's Thrust, which you might know from its slogan, Grasp the Grape.
Sorry, Thrush?
Thrust. So
Thrust, sorry.
Thrust, yeah. Grasp the Grape. It's a grape-based energy drink. Great taste, that's what they say. But anyway, Thrust sponsored us as well. And the kids were there for, 3 days straight, underneath the statue to the Boer war criminals in Shottingham Marketplace. And they were just, chopping away there, just chopping and chopping and chopping. And it was tough on the children, and it was tough on the parents seeing that, I think. But, there were a lot of cross little faces at the end of the 3 days. But I think it was because they knew it was for a good cause. That's why they continued doing it. And that's why they were able to stand up to the challenge and rise to sort of look the tiger in the eye.
Well, it sounds both horrifying and very impressive. And this was for a charitable campaign, you said. Tell us about that. What was the cause you were supporting?
Yeah, so the cause we're supporting, the registered charity, I hope you sort of share the information with your listeners.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's Let's Send Wee Callum Up Everest. Now, Wee Callum is one of our students at the dojo. He is a chronically ill child, but he's such a little trier. You know, I mean, his stance is terrible because of his condition. You know,
which is
well, so I mean, you know, not to go into too great medical detail, but
sure,
Wee Callum was very sadly when he was born, they discovered that he'd been born with 3 lungs.
Oh.
Now, you'd think, you know, 3 lungs, that's sort of better, you know.
Might be an advantage, yeah.
Might be an advantage having one spare, but actually it's not, because he's permanently breathing so much oxygen in that his brain can't cope with it. So he's permanently very dizzy and lightheaded. So his hand-eye coordination's terrible, you know, he's sort of not very good on his sort of memory and recall. But he has a warrior spirit. You know, sometimes I'll just be teaching the students, correcting the stance, and then I'll just feel a flurry of tiny blows against my shin. And it'll be Wee Callum there, just, you know, sort of going to town, pounding on my shin, trying to sort of bring me down. But, you know, I tower over him like a colossus, so there's nothing doing there, really.
Like a Steven Seagal in some ways.
Almost like a Steven Seagal over perhaps a Vern Troyer or one of those.
Or Danny DeVito. Possibly.
Danny DeVito or one of those. Perhaps, yeah, someone more current, I should say.
Good. I'm glad we've cast the image of that memory now, because I can picture it more clearly, and I'm sure the listeners can as well.
No, sure. And I mean, if you don't look at the cast of his face, he does have a sort of DeVito-ian sort of gleam to his eye. But anyway, Wee Callum recently is very sad, you know, because the techniques he was learning in the dojo, the deep breathing, things like that, they were actually helping quite a lot. But then he was hospitalised, and I'm afraid to say that the doctors found a 4th lung.
Oh my God! So sorry. So everyone assumed, and he'd been examined before, and they'd found 3 lungs, and thought, well, there's your problem.
Yeah.
And they found he had since grown another lung, or this was always there, they hadn't known about it, or?
I was just hiding behind another internal organ, really, and I think, you know, it was just shoddy doctoring the first time. And, you know, they found this 4th hidden lung, and I mean, that's set back, really. He's relapsed pretty badly, you know, he's still in there. But his spirit is a warrior spirit, and, you know, his great dream, because he loves 2 things. He loves karate, and he loves mountains. And his great dream is to go up Everest, because that's the biggest.
And this is the trip that you were funding through the 72-hour Chopathon.
Yeah, the Chopathon is dedicated to sending Callum up Everest because, you know, I mean, partly it'll be a treat for him, it'll be a nice holiday, but also the very, very thin air is going to be good for his lungs.
Yes, so there's less oxygen getting in. He's getting a normal amount of oxygen, but he's just consuming per volume a lot more air, a lot more gas.
Absolutely, because I mean, if you go up Everest, I mean, you have to sort of physically step over hundreds of bodies of, you know, sort of people who are having midlife crises, and they sort of get up there and then they can't breathe, and they're sort of just left up there as a sort of monument to man's folly. But Wee Callum, you know, he's going to be up there, he's going to be loving it. He's, you know, because he's going to be a normal boy up there. Because like his 4 lungs, you know, will be able to sort of get enough oxygen in. But you've held
the Chopathon and you've raised the funds, and so he's presumably setting off very soon.
Well, I mean, we still have got a while to go, actually, which is why, you know, usually I wouldn't sort of dignify this kind of program with me time. But the sort of reason that I did take you up on your offer was because we do need a lot more money. He's going to need a lot of Sherpas to sort of bring all his special medical equipment up.
Of course.
And I mean, you must know this as well, like Sherpas don't come cheap.
No, of course
no. Not if you want to get one of the good ones. So, yeah, we're doing a few more stunts, and we're hoping that's going to push us over the fundraising goal.
So there's still more fundraising to come, I see. So what else have you got planned?
Well, sort of in about 3 weeks' time, I think. Oh, crikey, that's not long, is it now? In 3 weeks' time, we're going to be, you might have seen this, actually. Have you ever seen people like karate chopping planks, you know, sort of?
Oh, yes, they chop them in half, and with their inner discipline, they're able to push through the pain and the physical improbability, and they smash the wooden board or the concrete block in half just with their flesh.
Well, absolutely, and we're sort of going to sort of build on that premise, and we're actually going to build a small semi-detached house purely using martial arts. So we're going to have people doing the timber. We're going to have people like smashing up the concrete to make, remake concrete essentially. Getting the slates into sort of perfect squares. Doing the cavity wall insulation, those kind of things. And, just purely using martial arts. So we're going to be doing that in three weeks' time. In
3 weeks' time, you said? Okay.
Yeah.
I might try and get a ticket up to Choddingham because that sounds actually absolutely fascinating.
Well, I think you should, Tom. You should, bring your friends, bring your family, just, it's a nice day out.
Well, maybe not my family, but we'll talk about it later.
We can talk later, can't we? You can always keep on my sofa. So there's...
Oh, thank you.
Well, I'll have to run it past my wife, but, I'm sure she'll be all right with that. Anyway, we're preparing for that. That's the next big stunt, and we hope that's going to sort of push us over the edge, really, because I'm going to be honest with you, Tom, I'm completely out of ideas, and we've got to get this wee lad up that mountain. So, I mean, if your listeners think of anything, any sort of stunts based on martial arts, as I say, put the GoFundMe there, and hopefully they can.
Yes, I'll almost certainly share the address for the GoFundMe alongside the release of the episode. Almost definitely. Wonderful. I mean, there are some other ideas you could hold. I mean, it's possible you could do a sort of one of those crouching tiger things where you do a demonstration of running up a tree or something, if that's in your skill set.
Well, I mean, that's mostly, I'm afraid, that's just sort of trickery from the Chinese film industry. It's mostly using wires. I mean, those kind of films, really, unlike the sort of, say, the Seagal ones, we don't treat very seriously. Because they've got more in common, really, with the, your Peter Pans and that sort of thing. It's mostly people flying around in wires, and it's all very silly business, really. So, but I mean, we could do that. We could do some sort of sponsored punching. I guess we could get like a big block of stone and we could obliterate it with our fists.
This might be a bit too direct for you. I don't know if this is something that you morally are interested in, but I mean, from the sounds of it, these children really are absolutely, razor sharp killing machines. And I thought possibly, if there is somebody that a resident of Choddingham has a problem with, they could hire one of the lads to beat the absolute arse off of on their behalf, and then you could raise money that way.
Well, I mean, that's something. Yeah, I mean, that idea, contract killing, it has been something that we've talked about in the dojo, and some of the boys are actually quite keen to do that. But I mean, for me, I think I would just have sort of a problem exchanging that service for money, because for me, I think that's a very sort of deep and meaningful act, sort of completely destroying a man with your hands. I think that's something that, that should be held sacrosanct. So I would have a problem with that. But, maybe
it's between you and the wee Raj that's squaring up to you.
Usually it's in that situation. It's like a kill or be killed situation. But, there are no bad ideas. I'm putting it down on my little whiteboard here.
Oh, well, that's nice. Thank you.
I'm just putting that down, contract killing. So that's something we could do. Yeah, I mean... Well,
it sounds like a wonderful campaign, and I really, really do hope that wee Callum does make it up there to the highest point of Everest. Not least because if everything you told me about his condition is correct, then he probably hasn't got that long left. So I do hope that you are able to give him that experience before he overinflates himself fatally.
Well, that's exactly the sort of problem. I didn't really want to sort of say it because some of the boys will be listening to this.
Oh.
I mean, I know, what kids are like. They usually they love podcasts, they love Adam Curtis, but they might be listening to this, so I didn't really want to say that. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, once they found the fourth lung, the doctor did that thing, where you tug on the colour and you go, oh, sort of the face. So, I mean, that was the diagnosis really, which I thought was a bit unprofessional, but, I guess
expect some sort of letter, an official diagnosis or
like a sort of letter coming through going, your child's dying, like something like that, rather than like a sort of bit of mime really. But, I mean, I don't know what kind of a day he was having. So, maybe it was a hard day.
I'm very fortunate that I personally haven't had much bad news delivered to me by a doctor. I mean, the odd complication I'm not going to go into any details about here. But, whenever I have had any sort of news about my condition or the condition of anyone I know and love, it's normally not delivered via a sort of Jerry Lewis amusing bit of shtick. Like, that's not generally how medical professionals have ever interacted with me personally. So that is a bit shocking, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, not typically. I mean, when I've had bad news from a doctor, he was very considerate and he was very, compassionate about it. I mean, it wasn't medical news. He was just telling me that someone had rear-ended my car. But I mean, that was still, still did it with like a real sense of sort of, stoic dignity.
That's more what you expect, isn't it?
Absolutely. I was fuming about the car, but, in the end, I did take the news. He did cushion the blow a bit, I can say.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. Well, it's clearly a very worthy cause, and you've done such great work trying to raise the money for it, and I'm delighted to call you a face of virtue. And I wish you luck with all of your further stunts, your further martial arts-based efforts. But before we say goodbye, is there any other word of wisdom, an adage or some sort of advice you have for our listeners of how to live their lives, things that can make the world a better place?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very glad that you've asked me that, Thomas, because, I think fundamentally what it comes down to is that thing I talked about earlier with the pigeons, about that sense of self-worth and respect. I think if everybody learnt martial arts, there'd be world peace tomorrow. Now, a lot more people would be violently beaten to death over very petty personal grievances, but there'd be no more warfare, and I think that would be perhaps a more dangerous world, but I think it would ultimately be a more rewarding world to live in.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, if the Bay of Pigs crisis was just about whether or not Brezhnev punched a pig, I think we'd all have been far less concerned.
I think absolutely. I think just so many things could be resolved by just taking your shirt off and just absolutely destroying another human being using just the fists that the gods gave you.
Aidan Turnbull, thank you very much for speaking to me.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Take care.
Take care. Unfortunately, while I'd have liked to link all you fine listeners to the crowdfunding website for Let's Get Wee Callum Up Everest, I'm afraid to say that it has been indefinitely shut down after footage from the 72-hour Chopathon was featured in Adam Curtis's recent 9-hour documentary Algorithm Slut, and was subsequently traced to the dojo Gambate Ne by the authorities. Still, best wishes to Aidan, and here's hoping that the inquest is short and painless. Very much the opposite of the 72-hour Chopathon. Once again, I'd like to thank Thomas Ellis for putting us in touch with Aidan. He's a writer and researcher who has contributed to CBBC's Horrible Histories and BBC Radio 4's podcast Homeschool History with Greg Jenner, available on BBC Sounds and all podcast apps now. Thank you all for joining me again in this little eddy on the current of Crowley time.
Faces of Virtue!